Hello, class. Our second chapter is on the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution. What is it? What does it really say? And it says we're a government of laws, not of people. It established the House of Representatives, it established the Senate, it established the presidency, and it established the Supreme Court. The Constitution can only be changed by general popular consent. That means the majority of us have to agree upon changing anything in the Constitution. And so what does it do? What does it do? It has laws and it has expectations of Congress. It has what the president can and can't do. It has regulations of how things are supposed to be. Now, how we started as a nation and how the Constitution was first put together is interesting. And that it was started by some settlers. They wanted some rules of the land as they went about setting up different colonies. The New England colonies set up a compact. You had different things where we were still being controlled by the King of England over here in the Americas, but we were still being controlled by what happened over in England. The colonies were set up like they were what they knew, which was like the British government was. And so a lot of things happened. Land rights that wasn't ours to give, but anyway, like I said, that's another story. Land rights were given to certain people. Lord Baltimore in Maryland, which is how we get Baltimore, Maryland. William Penn in Pennsylvania was given some land rights, as well as in Delaware. So what happened before the Constitution? 5 things happened before the Constitution. You read about this in your book, and even in your evaluation of ideas, I think there's a couple of questions that ask about this. And I'll spend a little bit of time next week letting you know what I'm looking for in your evaluation of ideas, since they'll be due next week. But there's 5 things that came before the Constitution. The first one was the Magna Carta of 1215. And that stated that the powers of England, of the English king, was not absolute. Then you had the Mayflower Compact of 1620. They actually wrote this social contract on their way over to the Americas. You have the colonial charters of 1624, the Declaration of Independence of 1776, and then the Articles of Confederation of 1781 to 1789. What were some of the problems that the new nation was facing? And I want you to pay attention to what some of these problems were. There was a lack of national unity. Each state was operating independently. Sounds familiar? There were financial difficulties. Congress didn't have the ability or the power to help the people directly. Commercial obstacles. What does that mean? States were free to tax their goods to other states, so there was no regulation of commerce. So if I didn't like you as one state, I could charge you more than I charge another state. Each state also had the power to issue their own money and the value of that. So $1 in Pennsylvania could only be worth 85 cents in Delaware. So there was no consistency in the value of money. And then you had civil disorder in terms of that the debtors did not want to pay their debts to the tax collectors. That sounds very familiar. So these were all problems that were facing the new nation, okay? So after those 5 things that came before the Constitution, they got together and said, okay, we need to talk about this. And they had the first Constitutional Convention of 1787. The Articles of Confederation was later known to be called the Articles of Confusion, because there was so much lacking and so much, they were just confusing. It was a confusing document. And so they got together and decided to have a Constitutional Convention in 1787. 55 delegates attended this convention. And what they wanted a national commitment from all the colonies. Of course, it was only attended by men, white men. And they wanted to have some unified thinking as it relates to politics, military, and the economy. So in 1787, all the states represented except for Rhode Island. Rhode Island was the only state that did not go. And they decided that there would be a republic form of government where the power lies in the votes of the citizens. Who are the citizens? We are the citizens. So why do I say voting is important? Because that's where the power lies. That 1787 convention gave us our three branches of government: legislative branch, judicial branch, and executive branch. It also determined that there would be taxes placed on imported goods but not exported goods. And so what happened in this great document that came out of the Constitutional Convention of 1787? The main thing, one of the major issues, was around representation. How were the states going to be represented? That was one of the main conflicts. So you had two things that came out of that. You have the Great Compromise that established the two houses in the legislature. So you had the House and the Senate. It was determined that the Senate would be represented by two people from the state. So every state would have two. The House would be represented by population size. Okay? So that's the difference. Now, our Congress is 435 people. You have 535 people. You have 100 people in the Senate, 435 people in the House. The reason why the census is so important is because it determines that representation in the state. So representation, 3/5 compromise was another major issue in terms of representation in Congress. What was the 3/5 compromise? The 3/5 compromise decided that black people who were slaves at the time could not be counted as full people, because to count the slaves for the southern states, that would always give the southern states more representation in Congress. So the northern states were like, no, we're not good. You can't count your slaves as part of your population, because you would always have more representation. And so in order for it to be somewhat, quote unquote, fair and equitable, they decided that a slave was not worth a whole person, but was only worth 3/5 of a person. So that's how they were able to count their slaves, not as a whole person, but as 3/5 a person. Now, my understanding is that there was no other group of people who was discounted as a whole person except people of color, particularly black people, who were slaves. So that in itself tells you how our founders felt about people that look like me and some of you. So representation was the main thing that was part of the issue in the Constitutional Convention of 1787. Of the 55 delegates that were at the convention, only 39 of them signed off on the new Constitution. And those that did not sign off on it was concerned about whether or not the government had too much power and too much authority. You had those that supported the Constitution, they were considered to be Federalist, and those that did not support the Constitution were considered to be anti-Federalist. So note that our Constitution came about. It was initially it came out of because the Articles of Confederation did not really answer all of the questions. And so you ended up with the Constitutional Convention of 1787, which is the first Constitutional Convention. There was another one.